Oh my goodness. It is so cold outside. Just lying here in my tent under my sleeping bag. Not feeling miserable. Sorry, my face is covered up in my scarf and everything. It's just cold. And I'm actually lying here. Grateful that I made it. Grateful for the hot hands that Christ Table, the free food place that I go to, passed out. But what I'm thinking about is how I read Chronicles in the first several, not first several dozen, but maybe the first dozen books of Genesis yesterday. And the Chronicler of Chronicles didn't do the best job of hiding his stitches, I guess I could say. What I'm thinking about is how the Chronicler did not have access to the Torah, and many of the Jewish culture heroes. I'm thinking about how I've already said that David is Orpheus, but I was sitting here calculating, trying to figure out, well, you make that claim, and then you have to, and you really want to make a career out of that claim, you have to figure out who has the longer legs. Did Orpheus come out of Judea as David and then walk his way across Greece from Ionia to Athens? Or did Orpheus walk his way down to Judea as Orpheus and become David? I don't know. I don't know that I have the ability even to track that down without an education and a university position, and I don't know that I want to either. This one's going to be longer than 2 minutes. Whoop-de-doo. But, what I know is true, is that the Chronicler had never heard of the exploits of Abram, Isaac, Joseph, Noah. None of it. He'd never heard of any of that. He was making an effort in the Hellenic period, sometime between 300 BC and the post-exilic period. In fact, he couldn't have written in post-exile. But anyway, neither could the author of, is it Ezra? Yeah, anyway. Had to have been writing before exile. Maybe even in exile. Maybe it was finished in exile, but it couldn't have been written after exile was over. But more importantly, he has no interest in any of the cultural myths, any of the details of the cultural myths that would have made his book as good as Herodotus, as good a riveting tale. Sure, he's got his king's lists and he's got his genealogies, but what he doesn't have is good, detailed narrative myths. He has a few. He has enough to write a book, but the reason that people go, and then he goes off on another king's list, is because compared to other contemporary authors, specifically Herodotus, Chronicles is boring as shit. That's why there are later books retelling that story, like Maccabees. That's why the Jewish tradition has to keep circling around and around and around and around their history. Like, the chronicler had never heard of the Exodus. He'd never heard of the Exodus out of Egypt. In fact, Shoshank is in Chronicles. I'm convinced that Shoshank's ancestor is Abram. And so what that means is that the division between the Cushites and the Libyans and the Judeans, as far as being practicing Jews, never existed. not in Chronicles. It's not in there. It's not there to be found. And so that means I'm more right than I want to believe I am. Even when I say these things, I always go, let's double check. It means I'm right. The Torah is largely useless. That's why it has to be the first 5 books. You have to read it first. You have to be mind-fucked to believe the narrative went exactly like this. And then everything after it that contradicts it, you go, well, it was older. It didn't really know. It didn't have access. Yeah, well, they didn't have access to these stories. They didn't have access to Moses and the staff. And the only mention that Moses gets in Chronicles is that he put the tablets in the Ark of the Covenant, but he doesn't mention them being broken. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. That religion, that text-based faith had to change a lot over time, and it doesn't want to admit it. So the more it insists it didn't, the more obvious and true that it becomes that it did. So anyway, good morning. If this is your first time checking me out, I am Shaggy Philolitea. I live in a tent. It is cold. I don't have adequate. I plan to go today. I'll walk around and see about finding adequate warmth, hopefully before the bus abandons me downtown. So wish me luck. I am homeless. I don't derive an income from ad revenue, so if you can find it in your heart, please do donate. Every dollar right now goes to keeping me warm. And food on the weekends. Yeah, these aren't going to be visually stimulating for a while, I don't think. Anyway, thanks for being here. This is 7 minutes. I am Shaggy Philolitea, and that was my obsessive thought of the morning before I get started.